We are about to get started. So real quickly, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of information on some stuff going on in the Talent Champions Council. So real quickly, we are moving over to a new platform. We're leaving Discord, no need to cry. And we are moving over to Mighty Networks, which we are extremely excited about. It's a much easier way for us all to collaborate, especially everybody around the world. We now have 500 members in 29 countries. So, and we think we're going to add 1,000 members in the next few months. So we're excited about that. Kathy Leckie has been working her tail off to get that up and running, and we're probably about a week or two away from launching that.
Very close.
Real quickly, so for those of you that are new, I'll give you the format in a second, but we do have a bunch of stuff coming up, so I'll just give you the next few. We have Alacia Abate. She is one of the world's most renowned futurists. She's former head of talent for Anheuser-Busch and Dow Jones. She's absolutely amazing. She's joining us in our Legend series next Tuesday on the 10th. Then we have a rock star CEO, Stephanie Malik. She's joining us on the 17th. And then we have two-time Olympian, gold medalist and former CEO of USA Canoe and Kayak, Joe Jacoby, joining us June 14th. In terms of book club, the book that we're all reading this month is Bet on Talent by Deanne Turner. Deanne was a 30-year head of talent for Chick-fil-A, and I'm excited about that. And then our book after that is Magic Blue Rocks by April Sprints, and April is on this call today, and I know she already has a question for Kim, so we will be seeing April shortly. So the format for those of you who maybe this is your first book club, Kim and I are gonna talk for about 30 minutes or so. And then we're going to open it up for questions. I do have about 5 already teed up from people who would like to ask a question. But if you do have a question for Kim, just put in the chat that you have a question, and then we'll tee you up and you can ask your question directly to the amazing Kim Scott. So we are incredibly honored to have the author of this amazing book, Radical Candor, which is a must read for any leader, and her latest book, which I just got into, Just Works, is incredible, and I'm absolutely loving that. But for those of you who don't know Kim, she's the co-founder of Just Works. She's a CEO coach to the likes of Twitter and Dropbox. She's on the faculty of Apple University. She's a former executive at Google. And I was actually just talking to Kara Shortsleeve, who was, I think, many rungs below you at Google, but remembered you well. She's a Princeton grad and has a master's from Harvard. So we are incredibly blessed to have Kim Scott, New York Times bestselling author of Radical Candor, here today to talk to us about what I think is an all-time classic book that, Kim, I think it came out in 2017. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. A while ago now.
Welcome to the Talent Champions Council. This is such an important book. I guess I want to start out with, why do you think it's so important? Because I think it's one of the most important things we need to do as leaders to ensure great cultures in our companies. So why do you think Radical Candor? What was it about that that inspired you to write such a classic?
Well, it was the thing that I struggled with as I became a leader. There was one point early in my career, I had started this software company, and I came into work one morning and I got the same article sent to me by 10 different people in a company of 65 people. And it was about how people would rather have a boss who is a real asshole than one who is really nice but incompetent. And I thought, are they sending me this because they think I'm an asshole or because they think I'm incompetent? And surely those are not my two choices. And so this really got me to thinking about something that I struggled with in the course of my career, which was feedback. And letting people know when they were going off course so that they could course correct. And I think part of the problem is that it's very counter instinctive for most of us. And so I really tried to think about what is it that makes for good feedback and why is it so counter instinctive. And that was really how I came up with a simple framework: care personally and challenge directly. When you do both at the same time, it's radical candor. But caring and challenging don't really sound so radical. Like, why did I call it? They seem pretty much like table stakes. So why did I call it radical candor? I think the problem is that so many of us are reluctant to do this. And it's because I think we have a negativity bias about a whole range of things, but especially around interpersonal relationships, because for most of our evolution, if we were excluded from our group of people, we were dead. And so we're super conservative. We're not willing to take any risk, even though 9 times out of 10 radical candor might work out for the better and the person just says, thank you for letting me know. 1 time out of 10, it's a little bit hard that we get either the person is either sad or mad or they brush us off. And somehow we're optimizing for that 1 time out of 10. So one of the things I tried to do to make it a little bit easier for folks to optimize for the 9 time out of 10 is to give names to what happens when we fail on either the care or the challenge dimension. So we can talk more about that, but that's a probably too long answer to your question.
No, it's a phenomenal answer. And I think there's certain things, I wound up going back because I originally read the book, I think probably around 2018. And, I scribbled and have dog-eared, and the thing is pretty beaten up, but which is a testament to you. But one of them, caring personally while challenging directly. The other part that I love is guidance that is both kind and clear, specific and sincere. Sounds like a Dr. Seuss rhyme, but that is phenomenal. And I absolutely love it. So you've got a lot of leaders on this call, and you talk in the book about these 3 core responsibilities that leaders have to create a culture of compassionate candor, to build a cohesive team, and to achieve results collaboratively. How does radical candor enable bosses to fulfill those 3 core things?
Yes. If we focus on the first thing, which is feedback, that's the model is all about, caring and challenging at the same time. So don't be obnoxiously aggressive. That's what happens when you challenge, but you forget to show you care. And the problem with obnoxious aggression is sort of threefold. The first is that you're wasting your breath. It's inefficient because when you act like a jerk, you put the other person in the fight or flight mode, and they literally can't hear you. So you're wasting your breath. It harms other people, so that's bad. But there's a more subtle problem, and that is that very often when we are obnoxiously aggressive, it's our instinct, at least it's mine, and I'm guessing a lot of you feel the same way, to go the wrong way on challenge directly rather than to go the right way on care personally. It doesn't matter. I didn't mean it, but it does matter, and I did mean it. That's why I just said it. And so it's so tempting when you realize that you've acted like a jerk to wind up in the worst place of all, manipulative insincerity. That's where, if obnoxious aggression is front stabbing, manipulative insincerity is backstabbing. And and then, that's where the kind of toxic workplace behaviors really creep in. And it's also where the human drama is. So if you watch The Office or the Silicon Valley show, the HBO show Silicon Valley, you'll see a lot of episodes about obnoxious aggression and manipulative insincerity. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of us make the vast majority of our mistakes in this last quadrant, where we do remember to show that we care personally. Because most people, despite everything you read on social media, most people are actually pretty nice people. So we do remember to show that we care personally, but we're so concerned about not hurting someone's feelings in the short term that we fail to tell them something they'd be better off knowing in the long run. And that I call ruinous empathy. So I think just having this shared vocabulary can really help you as leaders remember the importance of soliciting feedback. Don't dish it out before you prove you can take it. Giving both praise and criticism, and then gauging how it lands when you do give it, and also encouraging it across your teams. So that's sort of radical candor and feedback. Sort of start by soliciting it. Next, you want to make sure that you're giving more praise than criticism. It's not all about the bad stuff. In fact, if your job as leaders is to inspire people as to what's possible, praise is actually a more important tool for that than criticism. But you got to do both. And then you want to gauge how it lands for the other person. There's not an objective measure of what's radically candid. It's relational. And last but not least, you want to encourage people. You want to encourage people to speak truth to power to you. And you want to encourage people also you want to prevent backstabbing basically on your team. So that's feedback. Now, what about team? Feedback about a specific performance issue is hard, but what happens when it comes to feedback about you're not going to get promoted, or or you're going to work on this thing, not that thing, or even the for my money anyway, what is the worst part of being a leader? Sometimes the feedback means you're getting fired. Actually, it's not simply corrective. You've decided that it's not possible to correct the problem. And so this is now all of a sudden the stakes are higher. So how can you create a team on which in which you're using radical candor to make sure that everyone is taking a step in the direction of their dreams, in which everyone feels capable of doing their very best work? So in the book, I try to get into specifics, and I talk about having sort of career conversations, a methodology that Russ Laraway, who I worked with at Google and then started a company with, one of the many failed companies that I started. But he developed, but career conversations was not a failure. He developed that methodology, and he's got a book coming out in June where he writes more about it, called When They Win, You Win, Russ Laraway. So you all should have him on. So this, I think, is really helpful in terms of beginning to develop the kind of relationship with each of your direct reports that is going to help you set them up for success. So I talk about that. I also talk about around team building, an alternative to what's called talent planning. I think that there's a lot of problem with the way the words we use. The first problem is talent, and the second problem is this sort of performance potential notion. Like, there's no such thing, I believe, to my core. We can debate about this, but I don't think there's any such thing as a low potential human being. So having, declaring people high potential or low potential is not the right way to look at it. So what I encourage leaders to do is to identify people who are on a steep growth trajectory and people who are on a more gradual growth trajectory, and to distinguish that between performance. Like, they can all be performing excellently, but some people want that next job and other people don't. And you need a combination. If people who are on a steep growth trajectory are sort of the people on your team who are going to be a force for growth, the people who are on a more gradual growth trajectory are a force for stability. And if you're going to succeed as a team, you need both growth and stability. And all of us at different phases of our career are in gradual or steep growth mode. And so beginning to understand how to measure, how to manage people when they're in what I call superstar mode, that's the steep growth trajectory, and rock star mode, as in Rock of Gibraltar, or a more gradual growth trajectory. You want to make sure that you're supporting all of these people on your team equally. So I talk a lot about that. The other thing around radical candor and building a great team is to be conscious of being a thought partner. You know, you don't want to be a micromanager, and you also don't want to be an absentee manager. I think there's a school of thought that is, just hire the right people and get out of their way. And I don't think that works. I think people want actually to have a manager who's going to help be a thought partner, help them grow. And it's kind of like saying, "Oh, I'm going to marry the right person and then never spend another minute with him or her and or them, and then that's going to create a great marriage." That's not really how it works. You need to spend time with people and get to know them and help them and support them. So it's about a relationship. And then last but not least, when we talk about sort of achieving results, the third thing. So it's, you give feedback to a team to achieve results. I think it's really important to remember, certainly a mistake that I made, and a mistake that a lot of leaders who I've coached have made, is that they want to jump straight to execution. They have a bias to action, which is a good thing. A bias to action is like not a negative bias in my book. But you got to remember it's a bias. Like there's what I call a get shit done wheel. You got to listen and then clarify, and then you want to, once you've listened to a new idea, you've helped this person clarify it, then you want to open that idea up for debate, put it in the rock tumbler of debate. Then a decision has to get made. And remember, you as a leader are not the decider. You just decide who makes what decisions by when. So you want to push the decisions into the facts. Then you've got to sort of persuade the rest of the team, the people who weren't involved in that sort of somewhat tedious listen, clarify, debate, decide part of the process. You got to persuade them that this is the right call, and then you get to execute, and then you've got to learn whether it was the right decision or the wrong decision. That's where things like OKRs creep in. And you want to do all of that in a way that is radically candid. In other words, telling people what to do doesn't work. And so how do you go forward? So that's, I just threw a lot at you.
That was unbelievable.
Tell me where
you just talked about people needing to be together. And I'm wondering, Kim, what your thoughts are in this new work from home virtual environment. Does that make radical candor more difficult? Is it stay the same, or is it easier?
It's all of the above. It definitely it requires more. It offers some opportunities, but it requires that we be more conscious about how we are organizing the work, how we are building these relationships. When you're in a situation and you're seeing people as just like I'm seeing you all now, like little tiny boxes this big on my screen, you lose a lot of the texture of real life. And so you've got to be conscious about how you are bringing some of that texture back into your meetings. So a few things I recommend, a few sort of tweaks if you're remote or hybrid. One is that when you're having a staff meeting, a meeting with say 10 people or less, or even a lot of people. Like, you do what you all did today. There were 15 minutes, and I'm sorry I couldn't join for those 15 minutes. So I'm being hypocritical. I'm going to be radical. I'm going to be a little self-critical here. But you want to spend time connecting before content. So when I when I have a meeting, I'll try to reserve the first 10 minutes of that meeting, 5 to 10 minutes for people to do a check-in. And you can start the check-in just to ask people for, what are they coming into this meeting with? And you want to use a vocabulary that works on your team. Sometimes it's funny story from the weekend. Sometimes it's shitty story from the weekend. I hope it's okay if I curse. Tell me if it's not.
Very much so. It's encouraged.
Okay. But you want to talk about what's really going on for people. What are they really thinking about? Because so often, and this happens actually, I talk about check-ins for in-person meetings as well, but it's even more important when you're virtual. What'll happen is I'll come into a meeting and I'll be scowling. And all of you all are like, Kim is mad at us. Kim didn't want to be here. Like, something's wrong. And we tend to blame ourselves or misinterpret. And the fact of the matter is, I'm scowling because I just got a new puppy who just pooped on the rug. That's why I'm scowling. But if we don't save a few minutes at the beginning for folks to tell what's going on, then we don't have context. And so if we're physically in the office together, the odds are we've walked past the person and we kind of know what's going on, but we don't know in a hybrid situation or in a virtual situation. So it's even more important, I think, to save that time at the beginning of meetings for chit chat, the chit chat that would happen naturally if we were all physically in the same place. You need to actually be conscious of making time for that. I also think that the rethink your one-on-ones. I recommend, if possible, to have a 45-minute, 50-minute one-on-one with each of your direct reports every week when you're in person. But when you're not, you may think about having 3 15-minute check-ins Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I don't know about you all, but for me, in this hybrid world, time has sort of lost its meaning. Yep. And a lot can happen in a week. And because you're not having those drive-by conversations, it can be more useful to meet sort of in shorter time periods, but more frequently. The other thing to be aware of is Adam Grant has written a lot about this. There's a lot of evidence that shows it's better to have a phone call than a video call, especially if the conversation is going to be difficult. And the reason is that even when we're in person, we often misinterpret each other's body language, each other's facial expressions. And so there may be more noise than signal in a video call. And there certainly is when you haven't, which I am guilty of, been as disciplined as one ought to be about turning off notifications and beeps and dings. And there's all these distractions on our computer. And so it may be better just to call the person and listen to the tone of their voice. You want to have a synchronous conversation. Don't try to have these more difficult conversations over text or email. But it may be better to talk. And in fact, even in person, I recommend walking and talking rather than sitting across from the table, because when we're looking at each other, as we're all doing right now, there's part of our brains that interprets this as hostile, and when you're walking and looking in the same direction, there's sort of a metaphor there that is useful for the conversation. So lots of things to think about. Net though, I think I'm never going back to an office myself. So for all that I love relationships and being in person, I think there's so much time efficiency. Nick Bloom, who's a professor at Stanford, did some research, and he found that when people are working remotely, they save on average 2 hours a day. And one of those hours goes to their personal lives and one of those hours goes to work. And an hour a day is a big deal in my, it's the difference between exercising or not exercising. It's the
Right.
difference between having dinner with my kids or not having dinner with my kids. And as important as it is to be in person for relationships, our personal relationships are more important than our work relationships.
Right.
And so let's figure out how to build those work relationships. It's more important, I would argue, to be in person with my spouse and my children, and my mother than it is with my work colleagues. Not that I don't love my work colleagues, I do, but so I think it's useful.
No, makes sense. So last question, because we have more questions from other people than we could possibly get to, is that I think you can't go wrong with radical candor if it is kind, clear, specific, and sincere. I think back to a client of mine for many, many years, Bridgewater, run by Ray Dalio, and probably I can't think of an example of a company that practices radical candor, but can you take it too far, in your opinion?
So again, I think radical candor gets measured not at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ear. And if I have a criticism of Bridgewater's culture, as I understand it, and feel free to give me some feedback because you probably know more about it than I do. But there's not a lot of care personally. There's not a lot of focus on care personally there.
Yes.
It's much more challenged directly. And I think for a lot of people, they wound up feeling that that was an obnoxiously aggressive culture. Not for everybody. I think it worked well. I've certainly talked to people who've enjoyed it. But when I left Google, actually, I got approached by someone from Bridgewater saying, "Oh, we heard about your management style, and we want to talk to you about maybe a leadership role here." And when I looked into it, there was the following happened, which I'm going to classify as obnoxious aggression, not radical candor, and persuaded me that that culture was not what I would consider a positive one. There was a big meeting, there was a big debate in the meeting, and several people attacked one person, really in kind of a harsh way. And this person started to cry, and the whole meeting was taped. And then the recording of the meeting was then emailed out to everybody as an example of how to have meetings. And to me, that didn't show a lot of care personally for the person who clearly was not experiencing what was happening as radical candor. So I think it's really important to remember that, there's a lot of talk like, I want to be my authentic self. I want all of you to be your authentic selves. But part of that is me adjusting how I'm talking, depending on who I'm talking to and depending on the audience. So for example, I was managing teams in a bunch of different countries at one point, and radical candor sounded very different in Tokyo than it did in Tel Aviv. In fact, the team in Japan called it polite persistence, but that would not have landed. That would have landed like manipulative insincerity in Israel. And so you want to make sure that you're adjusting for the culture and also for the individual. If you're being radically candid if you're managing my brother, who is a better listener than I am and maybe more sensitive than I am, you need to attend more to the care personally dimension. Whereas if you're managing me, I'm not always the best listener. You may want to push harder on the challenge directly dimension than you're comfortable with. So I think it's really important to remember that there are two dimensions. Not to forget about the care personally. I mean, one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen made with radical candor is someone will say, "In the spirit of radical candor," and then they will proceed to act like a garden variety jerk. And that is not the spirit of radical candor. That is the spirit of obnoxious aggression.
Right.
Which is why in the second edition, I offer the alternative, compassionate candor, if you feel like that might be happening in your culture.
Love it. We have so many people that want to ask you questions. So I could go on and on for days. I'd love to talk to you more, but we are going to open it up for Q&A, and we're going first to Florida, April Sprints, who is our author for June with Magic Blue Rocks. You're up first with Kim Scott.
Awesome.
April, you're
Thank
up.
you. I appreciate it. First of all, I just want to take a moment and let's just recognize, Kim, that you've made a phenomenal amount of impact for the amount of years you've been on the planet. I just want to just put that out there. I am really impressed by that. And I loved in your book, and you talked about it a little earlier when you were speaking, this differentiation you made of your rock stars and your superstars. And both in my time in the military and in the corporate world before I started my firm, companies really struggle with this. They understand, I think, that both of those things are valuable, but I don't think infrastructure really supports it in the way that they recognize, compensate, promote. So for those leaders in companies that say, you know what, I really want to send a message that both of these things are very important. I specifically think of a startup that is now in the scale up mode, right? So they probably want a little more of a mix of rock stars than just superstars. What would be a good first step for them to start changing that paradigm?
I think the most important thing you can do is, if you're using a talent management system that involves potential, the word potential, throw it away. I offer in the book a different way to think about it. I love a good 2x2, but you have growth trajectory on the vertical axis and performance on the horizontal axis. You obviously want, everyone needs to be performing excellently to sort of get a high rating, get a big bonus, get a promoted, whatever. But there are some people who don't want that promotion. And how do you learn how to identify people who are currently in rockstar mode and people who are in superstar mode? And how do you make sure that you're not clipping the wings of people who are in superstar mode? And how do you make sure that you're honoring people who are in rockstar mode? And very often, sort of larger established companies have a tendency to clip the wings of people when they're in superstar mode.
Mm-hmm.
And startups have a tendency not to give respect that is due, especially when they're in growth mode, to people who are in rockstar mode. And so I think one of the most important things that leaders can do is to sit down with their teams and to be explicit about who's in what mode, and to make sure, another nuance, one of the dangers of rock stars, superstars, we tend to hang labels around, this is a rock star. We are in rock star mode, superstar mode. So words really matter. Be careful of that. When I edited the book, I had done it a million times myself. My rock stars, no, people in rock star mode. It's more words. It's worth using those extra words, because we change. So that's one thing. And be sort of explicit about, what do you think is the correct ratio? And if you want to begin to honor your people in rockstar mode, I think the most common mistake that companies make is they save all the highest ratings and therefore bonuses and therefore equity for people who are on a promotion track. And that is not fair to people who are in rockstar mode. It is one of the many injustices that gets baked. It's like, it becomes systemic injustice, where people who are going to get promoted get rated as having better performance, but they don't have better performance at this point in time than the person in rockstar mode. So I think making sure that you're doing a check on that. And then the other thing is to make sure that you're explicit by level. Like you probably want, for your entry level employees, you probably want more people in superstar mode, whereas at your VP level, you probably want more people in rockstar mode, because they're not all going to become the CEO. And making sure that you're honoring them. Apple did a better job of this, for example, than Google. Google wanted everyone in superstar mode in the early days, which was, I'm not knocking, it was like not surprising given where Google was. But Apple will really reward people who've been at the company for 30 years, and reward them like with real meaning. And I think also giving people giving people when they're in rock star mode the floor to teach others. Often they know something more deeply than anyone else at the company, and
Mhm.
people then take it for granted. Oh, that's so and so's job, and let so and so teach others how to do that, so that they're not single point of failure, and so that they get honored for their expertise.
I love it.
Love it.
Thank you. And I love specifically the thing about entry level versus at the leadership level, because the superstars, I can see them getting you there, but the rock stars will keep you there. And if
Yeah.
we remember that, I think it'll be really important.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you,
So
and thank you for your service.
we are going next. Mayan Gordon is traveling the country in a Hootsuite RV. She's all over. So she right now is in Provo, Utah.
Oh,
I
beautiful.
don't know, Mayan, if you're going to ask this question, but Kim talks about ruinous empathy. Gary Vee had a post yesterday about empathy. Mayan had a very interesting take on empathy. I don't know if that's where your question is, but anyway, Mayan, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's not particularly, I think the question I'm going to ask ties into kind of everything. And first of all, Kim, I want to say I love how you broke down radical candor into so many of its base components and elements, but also delivered those to us in chronological order of, I think, for everyone listening to this, it might have sounded like a lot, but once you start doing the first thing, it leads to the next thing, leads to the next thing. And so the first thing that I heard you speak about, which I also really believe highly in, is creating safety. And bringing up that from an evolutionary biology perspective, we are afraid of social consequence the exact same way that we are of mortal danger, because they were once one and the same and not too long ago. And it sounds like, within radical candor, it's really important to create safety for the person that you're giving that feedback to. I'm wondering, what have you found as the best way or best couple ways that the person delivering the radical candor can create safety for themselves? Because I also heard that it's not something you just do, it's something you have to really listen to, and probably within the conversation make adjustment for, to hear, did that person take that with sincerity and honesty, but also knowing that you care about them. So what are the ways that we as leaders, when we're getting ready to deliver this radical candor and we're feeling afraid and having fear, how can we create safety for ourselves?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first thing, there's sort of an order of operations, as you said, to radical candor. And I think it all begins with, especially if you're the leader, but really no matter who you are, the thing you can do to make it feel safer is to start by soliciting radical candor. Don't dish it out before you prove you can take it. Don't dish it out before you understand where this other person is coming from. And so if every one of you on this call can take out a pen and write down what's your go-to question. How are you going to ask for feedback? Because if you say, do you have any feedback for me? You're wasting your breath. I can already, oh no, everything's fine, boss. That people are not going to tell you what they really, there's profound reluctance. Especially when you're the boss. So, like, flattery is going to come at you like a thick, dangerous fog. And the best way to shine a light through that is to demand that people tell you. So, question I like to ask is, what could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? But don't use my question, because you're going to sound like Kim Scott and not yourself, and then people won't believe you really want to know the answer. So, for example, I was working with Krista Quarles when she was the CEO of OpenTable, and she said, I could never imagine your words coming out of my mouth, Kim. She said, the question I like to ask is, tell me why I'm wrong. Okay, that's fine. As long as it works for her, sounds like her, and for the other person. So the other thing about your feedback question, it's got to sound like you, but it also needs to work. So there were some people on Krista's team who felt intimidated by her, and she needed to adjust a little bit for those people. My question, my co-founder at Radical Candor, Jason Rosoff, told me shortly after we started working together that he hated my go-to question. For him, it was too open-ended. It was sort of stressful. I needed to get more specific. So make sure it's, adjusting for another person's needs is not inauthentic. It's like good communication. So do that. So you got to have your go-to question. You got to embrace the discomfort, no matter how good your question is. Person doesn't want to answer it. Close your mouth, count to 6. That was only 3 seconds. Almost no one can endure 6 seconds of silence. So now you drag this poor soul out on a conversational limb they never wanted to go on. You want to now make sure that you're listening with the intent to understand, right? Not to respond, because you're probably going to feel, even though you just solicited feedback, you're probably going to feel defensive. And that doesn't mean you're a lesser mortal or shut down. It just means you're human. So you want to, ask a couple of follow-up questions, and then you've got to reward the candor. As you said, we are really programmed to be very, very careful when it comes to social interactions. And if someone gives you some feedback, and if you don't reward it richly, then you're not going to get any more feedback. You're never, it's like, it's a high risk investment that this person just made in you. And you've got to make sure there's a great return on that high risk investment, even bigger return than you would for a risky financial investment. So you want to reward the candor either by listening, fixing the problem, make your listening tangible, ask for, did I overcorrect? Did I not go far enough? And if you disagree with the feedback, and this is going to happen all the time, if you disagree with the feedback, the most important thing you can do is to, first of all, look for that 5 or 10% of whatever the other person said that you can agree with, just to show that you want to make your listening tangible. And you want to show that you're not instinctively shut down. So you want to make your listening tangible, but you also want to be honest about the part that you disagree with. Say, as for the rest of it, I need to think a little bit more about it, and then I need to get back to you. And then do get back to them. Very often, the best reward for candor is an honest, respectful explanation of why you disagree. I think we have this instinct to feel, again, this comes back to psychological safety, to feel that disagreement is dangerous. But disagreement is not nearly as dangerous as unspoken disagreement, because that's how things pile up and become, that's how you get, if not technical debt, relationship debt. And eventually it kind of goes critical and blows up all over your relationship. So those are a few words on soliciting feedback. The next thing, now you're giving it, now it comes time to give it. You want to, first of all, focus on the good stuff. Make sure you're sharing with people the things you appreciate about them. That creates a great deal of safety on a team. But then you also need to tell them what the problems are, because we all know there's problems. And if we're not hearing about them, it does not feel safe. It feels like being a dead man walking. That does not feel good. But you want to make sure that and this, I think, first of all, remind yourself 9 times out of 10 it'll go well. But what do you do for that 1 time out of 10 when it doesn't go well? You've been specific and sincere and kind and clear, and the person is in tears, or the person is yelling at you, or the person is ignoring you. So what do? If the person is sad or mad, and to put it simply, that's your cue to move up on the care personally dimension. If the person is mad, get curious, not furious. But it's so tempting and instinctive to get mad back, and then you wind up in obnoxious aggression. Or if somebody's yelling at me, I tend to pull into my shell like a turtle and creep off to manipulative insincerity. It's okay. It doesn't mean I'm a lesser mortal. It's instinctive. So you need to learn how to manage against those instincts and to move up on the care personally dimension. But if the person is brushing you off, if the person is ignoring you, the person is defensive, now it's your job to move out on the challenge directly dimension, probably further than you're comfortable going. And that is really tricky because it feels mean, and you don't want to be mean. It feels risky to your reputation as a leader, but you've got to do it. It is your job to get through to the other person. And sometimes that can feel kind of harsh, and you've got to build the stamina to realize that it's your job to get through. Does that help?
That was amazing, incredible. And I want to share also that we're talking about this in context of work, but these things work incredibly well in marriages and relationships as well. This is like the answer to all the problems in life. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, often I'll give a radical candor talk and somebody will come up to me afterwards and say, gosh, if I had heard this 5 years ago, I wouldn't be divorced. So yes, you can use it at home as well.
Yeah.
So we're going to a familiar face who you may remember. We featured her book, Build It, the Rebels Playbook for Employee Engagement. Deborah Corey in the UK. Deborah, you're up.
Oh, hi, thank you.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi, nice to meet you. I have to say, I've probably on my own doing courses as an HR leader, probably sold 1 million copies of your book to people. It's high on my list. I do have to share a silly story, and it talks about what you talked about, differing based off of your people. When I moved to the UK from the US, about 3 months in, some brave employee told me that they had a Deborah Corey support group where they'd get together every Friday and share stories of how I had made them cry through my feedback. Now, of course, I hadn't read your book yet, but to me, it just showed the cultural differences. And in this day of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, I was just wondering if you could maybe take it a step further and talk a little bit about how do we deal with people who are so different in this world, to make sure that we do radical candor in the right way and we don't have these support groups.
Yes. Well, thank you for making yourself vulnerable and sharing that story. That is really hard to hear, and it speaks well of your leadership that someone felt safe enough to come and tell you that. So that's, I mean, that's 9/10 of it right there, is to be open to the feedback about your feedback. It's very meta. And to begin, because it's, people hide how they're responding, and so you've got to ask, like, people, how is this landing for you? And if you're not sure how the person is responding to what you're saying, take ownership. I'm not sure I'm saying this in the best way. Is there a way for me to say that better? So I think that's really important. I also, if you write a book about feedback, you're going to get a lot of it. And some of the feedback I got came from I was at a tech company in San Francisco, and the CEO of that company is someone who I like and respect enormously, and one of too few Black women CEOs in tech. And she pulled me aside, and after I gave the talk, and she said, Kim, I'm excited about radical candor. I think it's going to help me build the kind of culture I want. But I got to tell you, it's much harder for me to put it into practice than it is for you. She explained to me that as soon as she would offer even the most compassionate, gentle, radical candor, she would get slimed with the angry Black woman stereotype. And I knew this was true. And as soon as she said it to me, I sort of realized a bunch of things at the same time. The first was that I had failed to be the kind of colleague that I imagined myself to be. I had failed to even notice the extent to which she had to show up unfailingly pleasant and cheerful at every meeting we were ever in together. When, believe me, she had what to be pissed off about in that period of time, as we all do, but she wasn't allowed to show it, and I hadn't even noticed. So I had not been an upstander, what I call in the book an upstander. I also failed to recognize the extent to which the things that had been happening to me as a woman in the workplace, because I never wanted to think of myself as a victim. But even less than wanting to think of myself as a victim, did I want to think of myself as a perpetrator. So I had been even deeper in denial about the things that I had done wrong, the things that I may have done that harmed the people who I work with. And last but not least, I realized as a leader, I had failed to create the kind of environment in which we could all just work, just in the just get stuff done sense of the word, but also just in the justice sense of the word, where everyone had a fair opportunity to contribute to success. So I think that it is really important to remember that sometimes what happens is that people give what they think is feedback, but is not actually legitimate feedback. It's bias, prejudice, or bullying. And that's really the topic of my next book, Just Work, and would love to get your thoughts on it if you have time to check it out.
It is fantastic.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you.
Next, we are going to a guy who I always say makes the Dos Equis guy look super boring. Robert Hamilton Owens in California, you're up.
I just really appreciate the explanation of working with people from different cultures, especially as the last lady just talked about. The most difficult thing in my travel of 30 nations is to figure out how I'm going to say what I want to say and get the right response. And I just think that sensitivity of trying to figure out who you're speaking to with their personality, their gifting, and their level of job level, it's just a lot of work. The thing that's helped me out a lot is just going into more coaching classes. Because as a consultant, I always want to talk, but as a coach, I always want to listen. And so I appreciate everything you're saying, and I want to get back and read some more of your book.
Thank you so much. Yes, I agree. It is work. It is real work, trying to understand. If I said radical candor gets measured not at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ear. But how do you know what's going on inside another person's head? You know, the other thing that I have found really helpful in addition to coaching classes is reading novels. To me, that is a great way to build empathy and compassion for other people, because a novel gives you the opportunity to really get and walk inside another person's head and in their shoes, and that's one of the things I love to do.
Alex Smith in Florida, you're up with Kim Scott.
Awesome. Alex, I'm going to make you the last question because I have to go. I have to jump off in 3 minutes. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I feel really lucky, Kim. Pleasure to see you again. You were at our virtual sales kickoff in the beginning of January at Docebo.
Yeah,
So great
fun.
to see you. Yeah, it was really fun. One of the things like I love about like the approach is what you just said. Like it's not measured by the speaker's mouth, by the listener's ear. I'm curious, you know, if you have a story through your career of maybe where you got it wrong, like how you initiated that first reach out. Because I think that for me, like the scariest part of giving feedback is just that first way that you do it, whether it's like, hey, let's jump on a call or something. You know, the first thought of people is like, oh wow, this is really important, or oh, you know, what's going to happen here. It's just we stumble over it with our words, and I think words are so important. So maybe tell us a story of where you got that first interaction wrong, and maybe where you feel like you got it right. I would love to hear it.
Yeah. So one time when I got it wrong, I was at a startup, and I would say to someone, "Let's go get a cappuccino," because I thought that was an easy way to. And there was a Dean in DeLuca right across the street. I thought that was a good way. And then I overheard someone saying, "Uh-oh, it's the cappuccino of doom." And I realized what I was doing wrong in that case was that these private chats were always about criticism and never about praise. And so that's an example of getting it wrong. I will say, you know, in some ways, the virtual environment makes it easier because you can text, you notice someone doing something great on a meeting. It's good to, you know, praise in public. So you should say something in public at the time, but you can also text them and say, "Can we chat after the meeting?" And you notice somebody doing something wrong in a meeting. You can text them and say, "Can we chat? Can we call? Can we have a quick call after the meeting?" And in Radical Candor, I tell this story where I said and my boss said, "Why don't you walk back to my office with me?" And you know, that sounds easy, but it's actually really hard to do, because I found when we were in person that you know, there's a big meeting and someone did something wrong, and I wanted to ask them to walk back to my office with me, like my boss had done, but they were surrounded by other people. If I walk up to them and say, "Will you walk back to the office with me?" then everybody's like, "Uh-oh, you know, they're in trouble, cappuccino of doom." And so I think setting up a quick chat after is a good use of technology. So a quick text, "Can we chat?" right after. And this requires that we are disciplined about making all our 30-minute meetings 25 minutes and all our hour-long meetings 50 minutes, so that we have a little bit of slack time in our calendar. If you can't do that, sometimes you just have to be willing to be late to your next meeting.
Kim, we absolutely love you. Radical Candor is phenomenal. Everybody pick up Just Work, Get Shit Done Fast and Fair. You'll love it. I am probably 100 pages in, and it is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all. Loved the conversation, loved the engagement. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you all what I could do or stop doing to help you all put these ideas into practice. So keep in touch, Kim@radicalcandor.com. Would love to hear you, or radicalcandor@radicalcandor.com. And then the whole team sees it.
Awesome. Thank you,
Thank you,
Kim.
Kim.
For
Thanks,
those that
Kim.
want to stay for a little overtime, feel free to stay on. Would love to have you and chat more. Thanks again, Kim.
Thank you so much. I'm also very happy that today I have been able to attend this important